In Crimea, the GUR struck a state-of-the-art Russian radar station. Trump and Putin could meet as early as this Monday. China is prolonging the war in Ukraine to weaken the United States before invading Taiwan. The Pentagon is considering redirecting weapons intended for Ukraine to American stockpiles. And India, after pressure from the US, has stopped buying oil from Russia. Hello, my name is Anastasia Dmitrovskaya. Right now, let's talk about the main stories. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose touch with you on YouTube. It seems that drone attacks on Russia are becoming something of a tradition. This time, unidentified drones attacked the Rostov region. Later, Russian media reported explosions and a fire near a military airfield in Milerovo. According to local authorities, air defense allegedly shot down drones in the Milerovsky and Chertkovsky districts. But in Milerovo, a gasoline tank caught fire. There were also reports of explosions in the Rostov, Saratov and Ryazan regions. And as Russians themselves write, the distinctive feature of this attack was that the drones allegedly began taking off from a camper van equipped with solar panels. Attention! In the Saratov region, drones with explosives are being launched from cars. Meanwhile, the OSINT community Cyber Boroshno reported that on the night of August 7th, Ukrainian defense forces struck the newest Russian radar station during an attack on the occupiers' air defense systems in Crimea. According to OSINT sources, the video published yesterday by the main intelligence directorate shows the destruction of the newest 98L6 Yenisei radar, not the older 96L6 or S400 radar, as previously reported by intelligence officers. In fact, the main intelligence directorate reported that as a result of the attack, they struck a Russian landing craft, several radar stations, and an air defense base on Petri. Experts reached this conclusion by analyzing the visual features of the object. The Yenisei is a relatively new Russian development which underwent testing in 2020 and 2021 and was put into service a year later. And despite the claimed technological advancement of the Yenisei radar, fighters from the GUR special unit Ghosts destroyed it with a domestically produced drone. Yesterday, we told you about the Russians' plans to recapture Kherson. And let me remind you, according to information from CNN, the plan is to seize the Korable district on the right bank of Kherson.
The renewed and increasing pressure to effectively isolate the Korable district from the rest of the city has indeed raised significant concerns that Russian forces may soon attempt to heavily bomb and then successfully land on the relatively flat terrain in the coming weeks.
The Russians in Kherson are indeed active. And for the fifth day in a row, the occupiers have been striking the same bridge in Kherson. And as military expert Ivan Stupak says, Russia is indeed planning to push the Ukrainian armed forces out of the Korable district.
They are cutting off the bridge. Well, at least they're showing that they will do it eventually. I absolutely agree that sooner or later they will destroy it with bombs. It's only a matter of time now. I don't know if we're talking days or weeks. We'll see. Ukrainian forces will be forced to leave this island to minimize their presence as much as possible. And in this way, the Russian Federation will win, at least in the short term. This means safety for themselves on the left bank of the Kherson region, where they are occupying. That is, Ukrainian forces are withdrawing. They no longer shell Russian positions from this strategic island. They don't launch their unmanned aerial vehicles, and the island basically turns into more or less a contested gray zone.
Another question is whether the Russians' plan is actually realistic. So, according to the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, the landing of the occupiers in the Korable district of Kherson is, from a military standpoint, actually a highly unlikely scenario.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The scenario in which the enemy will now try to land in the Korable Island district is, from a military perspective, highly questionable, because before reaching the Ostrov district, the enemy would have to cross several water channels and pass through several islands. And that's quite difficult to do nowadays. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are targeting all assault and crossing groups that the enemy tries to send to our shore. For the enemy to swim from one bank to the other, it takes time. And during that time, we can locate all these enemy assault groups because we're not just going to sit idly by and wait for the enemy to land on our shore and start capturing parts of the city. Talking about this scenario right now is like discussing various scenarios about events that are still rather unlikely at this point. But I think our military will give the Russians a hard time. And what do you think about Russia's plans for Kherson? To meet or not to meet, that is the question. Yesterday, everyone was actively discussing the news about a meeting between Trump and Putin. And the Kremlin says that everything has already been agreed upon and the meeting is being actively prepared.
The initial target date for this significant meeting was originally set for next week. However, as I have just mentioned, both involved sides are now actively and directly preparing with considerable diligence for this exceptionally important upcoming meeting. The precise number of days these extensive preparations will ultimately take is still, at this moment, quite difficult to definitively determine. Allow me to reiterate, the viable option of holding the important meeting during the course of the upcoming week was thoroughly considered, and we unequivocally view this particular option in a remarkably positive light.
In addition, Russian media are even naming a date for the meeting, August 15th. And Fox News reports that the Trump-Putin meeting could take place on Monday, possibly in Rome. But Russia, in turn, has already stated that Putin definitely will not go to Rome. For reference, it should also be mentioned here that Putin is essentially refusing to meet with Zelensky, as Trump mentioned, using the excuse that it is impossible to prepare for negotiations with Ukraine.
And what about Zelensky?
Will there be a meeting?
I have already said many times that I have nothing against it in general. It is possible, but certain conditions must be created for this. But unfortunately, so far, no one intends to create such conditions.
And here, Russia is in for a surprise. Because firstly, the White House denied the statement that a meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States had been agreed upon. Moreover, ABC News and the New York Post, citing the same White House report that Trump definitely will not meet with Putin unless the Russian president holds a personal meeting with Zelensky. When asked by a journalist whether he had made such a demand to Putin, Trump himself replied briefly, no. Although, again, in the White House's preliminary statement, it was said that Putin should meet with Zelensky before meeting with Trump. In short, there is still no clarity about whether the meeting will take place and under what conditions. Meanwhile, Suspilne, citing its own sources, reports that the White House is nevertheless preparing for a trilateral meeting. And while everyone is speculating about when and how this meeting will take place, CNN reports that Putin agreed to the meeting solely to buy time. And it's hard to disagree with that because it's obvious that Putin doesn't want peace, no matter how much he pretends in front of Trump. So for now, there's only one thing that's interesting. How will Trump punish Putin, considering that the 10-day deadline for peace expired on August 8th? And will he punish him at all? What do you think about this? Write your thoughts in the comments. And continuing on the topic of Russia's true intentions. They don't really hide their desire to destroy Ukraine, and it's not just the propagandists who talk about it. The results of the meeting between Witkoff and Putin were commented on by a full member of the Presidium of the Council under the President of the Russian Federation for Interethnic Relations. There was no analysis of the negotiations, but instead there was yet another call for genocide.
We want Ukraine as a state to cease to exist, for its military potential to be completely destroyed, for the political class that has always turned any Ukrainian state into an anti-Russia to disappear as well, for these people to leave, let me put it mildly, somewhere into exile or just far away. But in any case, so that it would never again be possible for decades or centuries to come to create another anti-Russia out of Ukraine. That is our goal. Based on this, we must build our plans.
And this fits very well into the overall picture of Russia's demands on Ukraine, to give back our territories. And I think that if a meeting with Trump does take place, Putin will definitely propose securing Russia's control over the occupied territories in exchange for something. And it is quite possible that the condition published yesterday by the Polish outlet Onet will be voiced, the recognition of the occupation by postponing the issue for 49 or 99 years. But in Ukraine, nothing changes. Whatever Putin and Russia propose, calling it a peace plan, Ukrainians will not agree. Yesterday, Kiais published the results of a sociological survey. 76% of Ukrainians categorically reject Russia's peace plan. We have repeatedly said that Putin wants to buy time, and the upcoming negotiations with Trump, if they happen at all, are also part of this process. All the Kremlin needs is time to seize even more, or ideally, everything. But it turns out that it's not just the Kremlin that is interested in the war in Ukraine. The publication Telegraph writes that China also wants to prolong the war in Ukraine. All of this is to weaken the potential of the United States before an invasion of Taiwan. And peace in Ukraine stands in the way of this plan. China is interested in the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine, aiming to deplete the American arsenal of weapons, which has already been reduced to a dangerous level due to aid to Ukraine and Israel. China believes that reducing the combat readiness of the United States is crucial to preventing American intervention in China's upcoming invasion of Taiwan, which some U.S. military officials estimate could happen around 2027. It's interesting, could this be the reason why China, albeit secretly, is still helping Russia, particularly in circumventing sanctions? So, Trump was right when he imposed new sanctions against Beijing, although China was outraged by the actions of the United States. Well, I have to admit, it's not hard to believe that this is in China's interest. What do you think? And since we've started talking about sanctions, just recently Donald Trump imposed additional tariffs on India, and all because the country is buying Russian oil. So the Indian authorities complained and then suddenly stopped buying oil from Russia. According to sources directly familiar with the company's procurement plans, India's state-owned oil refineries are refusing to purchase Russian crude oil as Washington increases pressure on New Delhi with a wave of harsh tariffs. Companies such as Indian Oil Corp, Bharat Petroleum Corp, and Indian Petroleum Corp are planning to refrain from bulk purchases of crude oil in the upcoming procurement cycle until there are clear government guidelines. Faced with U.S. pressure, India was understandably alarmed, and even more so than by the prospect of worsening relations with Russia. And considering that India is one of the largest importers of Russian oil, it seems to me that very soon Putin will say his famous line,
We were duped, deceived outright, as people say here, we just got played.
I wonder, after this, will Putin still be hugging India's Prime Minister Modi? What do you think, has the friendship cracked? Write your thoughts in the comments. A Russian explosives manufacturing plant managed to obtain Siemens equipment despite the sanctions. According to Reuters, citing customs data and government procurement documents, this was accomplished through an intermediary that imports products from China. Thus, in October 2022, the Bivsky aluminum plant in southern Siberia signed an agreement with the Russian company Tekpribor for the supply of Siemens equipment. In less than 6 months, the plant received a shipment from a Chinese company that included Siemens power regulators identical to those the plant had ordered. But as they say, that's not all. In 2023, Tekpribor also imported products from a German company through another Chinese supplier based in Xiamen. In fact, both suppliers stated that they can freely purchase Siemens products and that the company does not check the end user, whereas Siemens claimed that they strictly comply with international sanctions and require the same from their clients. At the same time, they admitted that some products may end up in Russia without the company's knowledge. Well, what can I say? I honestly don't know how it happens that sanctions don't work, but this principle of nothing personal, just business works like clockwork. Isn't it amazing? The Pentagon is considering redirecting weapons intended for Ukraine to American stockpiles. CNN reports that the Pentagon has already prepared a memorandum according to which some of the weapons and equipment originally intended for Ukraine may be returned to U.S. arsenals. Such a move would allow the U.S. to replenish its depleted stockpiles, but could potentially deprive Kyiv of billions of dollars in previously promised military aid. Journalists also note that tensions are rising amid preparations for a possible meeting between President Donald Trump and Putin next week. Although Trump has formally approved the sale of weapons to Ukraine through NATO, the Department of Defense is concerned that supplying critical systems, interceptor missiles, air defense equipment, and artillery ammunition could undermine U.S. defense capabilities. What do you think? Will the U.S. end up redirecting weapons intended for Ukraine to its own stockpiles? The U.S. has created an analog of the Iranian drone Shahed 136. The analytical community International Defense Analysis has published a photo of the new drone, although its specifications, warhead, flight range, and production cost have not yet been disclosed. Meanwhile, in Turkey, a Bayraktar drone equipped with a Ukrainian engine has been tested. The Turkish company Baykar began developing a heavy strike drone back in 2018, and by 2019 had already equipped it with Ukrainian turboprop engines. The Bayraktar Akıncı is a heavy strike drone capable of carrying up to 1,350 kilograms of combat payload. In terms of size, it is 12.2 meters long with a wingspan of 20 meters, and it can stay airborne for up to 24 hours, reaching altitudes of over 12,000 meters. By the way, last year Baykar began building a plant in Ukraine for the production of Bayraktar unmanned aerial vehicles. It is known that they plan to produce more than 100 drones per year at this facility. And finally, an unexpected piece of news from Russia. Honestly, I could never have imagined this was possible, but a Russian court has ruled that the word khokhol is intended to demean a person's dignity based on their nationality.
Now that's a twist.
And for using this word, a woman in Russia was even fined after she lashed out at a neighbor in a house chat, apparently because he had a Ukrainian-sounding last name. Now the question is, will Russian courts start fining everyone who insults others with the word khokhol? Well, at least the propagandists. It just doesn't seem fair that Simonian and Solovyov use the word khokhol every other sentence, while a Russian woman from Buryatia was fined for saying it just once. Please like this video to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.